Your cardinal has been attacking his own son at the feeder, and it is not what you think. You've seen it. A duller, browner young bird lands to feed, and the bright red male comes in fast, driving him off entirely. Most people who see this assume something has gone wrong between them. It hasn't. Nobody ever told you what that chase is actually for. Subscribe to Bird Sense right now. This is exactly the kind of thing we uncover every week, and why your cardinal is doing this to his own offspring on purpose right now. That is what changes everything. To understand what he is actually doing, you have to understand where that young bird is in his life. By late summer, a juvenile cardinal hatched in spring is fully capable of flying, foraging, and feeding himself. He no longer needs his father in any functional sense, but instinct does not update on a calendar the way a parent's feelings might. The juvenile still returns to the feeder his parents have been using all season, still approaches with the same posture he used as a nestling, still expects tolerance. What he gets instead, more and more often as summer stretches on, is aggression. Real aggression, wings raised, beak snapping, a chase that ends only when the young bird leaves the territory entirely. Here is where it gets strange. This is not neglect, and it is not a breakdown in the relationship. Ornithologists call it post-fledging conflict, and it is one of the most consistent, predictable behaviors across songbird species that raise multiple broods in a season. A pair of cardinals in the eastern United States can raise 2, sometimes 3 broods between spring and late summer, and each new clutch demands the same finite resources, the same territory, the same feeder, the same insects for the next round of nestlings. A father who is still tolerating last month's offspring at the food source is a father actively undermining the survival odds of the chicks currently in the nest. The aggression toward the older juvenile is not cruelty. It is triage, running on a timeline the parent bird did not choose and cannot override, calibrated to chicks he cannot yet see from where you're standing, but is already feeding somewhere close enough in the yard that the math never really stops, which means the specific timing of that chase tells you something real about what is happening in your yard, beyond what you can see. If your cardinal has started driving off a young bird at the feeder, there is a strong chance a second nest is already underway somewhere nearby. Eggs recently laid, or chicks already hatched, demanding every calorie the parents can bring in. The aggression you're watching is not directed at the juvenile out of anger. It is a resource reallocation happening in real time, and the juvenile getting chased off your feeder this week is the visible cost of a decision that was made the moment the female started building a second nest, weeks before you ever saw the first chase happen at your own feeder. Most people across the country who watch this unfold in their own backyard, from a porch in Ohio to a fence line in Georgia, read it as a family falling apart, and it troubles them more than almost anything else they see at a feeder all year. A parent bird attacking its own child looks, to a human observer, like the worst kind of failure. But the juvenile is not actually in danger the way the scene suggests. He is fully flighted, fully capable of finding food elsewhere, and the aggression is calibrated specifically to push him toward independence, not to harm him. Researchers studying post-fledging behavior have found that juveniles who are driven off earlier and more decisively tend to disperse into their own territory faster and with a measurably higher first-year survival rate than juveniles allowed to linger near a parent's territory into autumn. But researchers found something they did not expect. When they looked at which juveniles get pushed out fastest and hardest, it is not random, and it is not the same for every offspring. Male juveniles, who will eventually need to establish and defend their own territory to breed, tend to be driven off with more intensity and earlier than female juveniles, who can often disperse more gradually. The father's aggression is not a blunt instinct applied evenly to every young bird in the yard. It is calibrated to the specific future that offspring is heading toward. Sharper, faster pressure for the son who will need to fight for ground of his own within a year. Gentler and slower for a daughter who has more room to disperse gradually without the same territorial clock working against her. Which means the chase happening at your feeder right now is not a single event. It is one visible moment in a process that has already been running for days or weeks, escalating gradually before it reached the point where you actually noticed it. Early on, the aggression may have looked like nothing more than a slightly shorter fuse, the adult male tolerating the juvenile for a little less time before shifting his posture. A warning rather than an attack. Only once that lower intensity pressure fails to move the juvenile along does the behavior escalate into the open chase you're more likely to catch from your kitchen window. By the time you see the dramatic version, the quieter version has usually already failed several times over several days, without you ever noticing the buildup that led to it. Here is where it gets even stranger. In some cases, the same father who is aggressively driving off this year's juvenile will tolerate that exact bird again months later. Once breeding pressure has ended for the season, the aggression is not a permanent rupture in the relationship. It is tied specifically to the resource competition of an active breeding cycle. And once that cycle ends in early autumn, researchers have documented previously chased juveniles returning to shared feeding areas with little to no continued hostility from the same adult who drove them off all summer. The father is not rejecting his offspring as an individual. He is enforcing a boundary that exists only as long as the boundary is functionally necessary, tied to a clock that started the moment the second clutch was laid and ends the moment those chicks no longer need everything he has. Which means the next time you watch a bright red cardinal chase a duller, younger bird off your feeder, you are not watching a family falling apart. You are watching a father run a calculation that has nothing to do with resentment and everything to do with the chicks that are still depending on him right now. Today, somewhere close enough that every calorie matters. The aggression looks personal because you are watching two individuals you can recognize. You've likely seen this exact juvenile at your feeder for weeks, watched him grow into his flight feathers. And it's natural to read cruelty into a scene that features two familiar faces. But it is not personal. It is timing, resource math, and an instinct built to protect the offspring who cannot yet fend for themselves at the direct expense of the one who finally can. By September, in most cases, the chasing stops on its own, not because the relationship healed, but because the thing driving it, a second brood needing everything the parents have, is finally old enough to need it a little less. The juvenile you watched get driven off in July may be back on that same feeder in October, tolerated without incident. The boundary lifted the moment it stopped being necessary. What looked like rejection was never permanent. It was a father doing exactly what the season required of him. On a schedule he never got to choose, running the same calculation his own father likely ran on him, and his father before that, all the way back further than anyone watching from a kitchen window in America has ever thought to ask.